Nick Kaufman is a land use planner for WGM Group in Missoula, Montana.
I'd like to see Missoula develop as a well-designed community with an opportunity for everybody who wants to own a home to have that chance. That means we need to all work together to find places for housing where there's services close to schools, places where we can develop and provide people with homes that they can afford. The first thing we consider when designing a project is the location of the site. The first thing we look at is the physical characteristics of the property. How steep is the slope? Is there a problem with the floodplain? Is groundwater too close to the surface? Is bedrock too close to the surface? If all the physical attributes of the site would support development, then we start to look at those things that would have a cultural influence. Do we have access? Do we have sewer? Do we have water? Is the property zoned correctly so we can put homes on it? Then we go talk to the neighbors to see how they feel about the property, and we try to work with them to modify the design so there's the least amount of impact on adjoining neighborhoods while we still try to provide the density that's needed to keep housing affordable. Most politically acceptable type of development is development that matches exactly what development is in place. So if you have lots that are 100 feet on one side by 100 feet on the other, that's a 10,000 square foot lot or a quarter acre lot, that's a size that a lot of people would say is sprawl. But if you want to do a development next to people that have lots that are 10,000 square feet, they don't want to see any lots smaller than the lots they have, or their perception is that that affects their property value. Okay? So we actually do more subdivisions that could be defined as sprawl, and the governing bodies approve more subdivisions that are defined as sprawl because they are politically acceptable. The hardest subdivisions to do are those subdivisions that have higher density but more design, where the homes are closer together and the lots are smaller. And the reason those are harder to do is because the adjoining property owners have bigger lots. And their perception is that the smaller lots will affect their property values. So it takes a lot more work with the adjoining property owners, a lot more time, and a lot more money. WGM Group as a company generally does more subdivisions that involve clustering and higher density and more affordability, which is infill development, than we do subdivisions that are sprawl. But there are a lot of subdivisions done out there that are sprawl-type subdivisions, mostly because that's what the political system encourages developers to do. Well, infill development would be something where we could, it's been called in the past committed lands. And those are lands that are close into services, where schools currently exist, where police and fire services currently exist, where you've got sewer, water, and utilities, close to shopping. Those lands, and there's lots of vacant parcels out there, both big and small, we call committed lands, and those are the places that we like to see development occur as what we'll say infill development, because they're scattered around like a patchwork quilt. And what you do is look for those places in the quilt that aren't filled up with homes, and you put homes there, and that's infill development.
James Hoffman is an architect for James Hoffman and Associates in Missoula, Montana. He was kind enough to share his views and information.
I'm probably asked to do more infill work. I'm certain I do more infill work than sprawl work. And the reason is infill tends to be higher density. And the smaller the lots and the higher the density, the more you need to integrate architectural design with land use design also too. So it's necessary to employ an architect to design projects because he has to develop the architecture along with the land use plan. So in sprawl developments, the lots are bigger, so there's a lot more latitude in the selection of house designs, and consequently a lot of developers, builders, and homeowners use canned plans from plan services and don't need to talk to an architect to tailor a design to a small lot, as happens in infill. I read a statistic a few years ago that only 1 house in 20 is designed by an architect, and that's a believable statistic. There are, and there become increasingly more regulations, and I have become a believer in the need to have standards and regulations in order to assure that good design occurs. And the reason I say that is because it's easy to to find here in our community examples of bad design, bad land use design, and bad architecture and infill development. So I'm an advocate for those regulations. Missoula recently adopted some regulations that encourages good design, and I heartily support them.
And not have it developed.
You know, at 5 and 6 and 7 acres a unit, you know, it's hard to call that a neighborhood because there's such distance between homes. I mean, nobody's going to be walking anywhere. They have to drive everywhere, even if you go visit your neighbor. You know, if they're 3 houses away, it might be a half a mile. So there's not much of a sense of neighborhood at that low density. I think what more characterizes the sprawl development to which you refer are, you know, densities that were probably from 1 to 4 units an acre. Exemplify some of those features. Truly, to create a neighborhood, you need about 40 acres is commonly held as being the floor, a minimum area, because a neighborhood is pretty generally defined by those involved in this movement as being that which you can walk across in about 5 minutes. So within that 5-minute walk, you can find schools, shopping, some jobs. I mean, there's some commercial activities. There's a diversity of housing, both in terms of style, size, and price. But even if you don't have 40 acres, still you can make modest gestures to show how you can better design infill development by employing certain techniques and design ideas that play upon what the more attractive neighborhoods you can find here in Missoula. And those neighborhoods being the historic South Side or the University area, the Lower Rattlesnake, all of those older neighborhoods where the bulk of the housing was designed and constructed between 100 and say 50 years ago have a lot that's similar. To begin with, they all have the alley system where the garages and garbage cans and canoes and trailers are back in the alley along with the cars, so that the fronts of the houses that face the street, their public face, are very pedestrian and people friendly because they show that those homes are places for people and not garages to house their cars. So they all have porches. There's you know, all their historic architectural detailing is familiar and friendly, and it makes it all comfortable. Those are the kinds of things that I, as a designer, those features are the kinds of things I try to do in our infill development. What I hope to see is that infill will be encouraged and sprawl discouraged, because I think we'll find, to begin with, and most fundamentally, more affordable housing. And I think that's very important because the cost of housing is far outstripping people's increase in incomes, and I think it's put a terrible squeeze on low to moderate income peoples in this community. Over 40% of the households in this community qualify for federal housing supports because they spend, by the federal government's calculation, too much money on housing. The only way to solve that is with higher density housing, and for that to be done well, we need to do a good job of designing it. And we need even more regulations and development standards, I think, than we have now. I hope someday that this community adopts them. And while there will always be a demand for lower density suburban type homes, I hope this community adopts policies and incentives to encourage infill so that people of ordinary income, you know, I don't, or at least given the opportunity, I try to create variety, because I think the sense of individuality lent by different homes, different styles, different colors, it lends a stronger sense of the traditional homeowner-occupied neighborhood where each home was built at a different time by different people with different tastes and different budgets. I think that's a better model than a project-type model where there's a blanket architectural design that characterizes every.
Jerry Taylor is a contractor for Westmont Builders in Missoula, Montana.
Zoning is a very, very critical issue when you are doing any kind of development. You're mandated by what the zone is. You can get zoning changes, but it's very, very time consuming and very, there's a lot of things that have to happen. You have to go through various city and county organizations to get things approved and passed. Many times you have to have the approval of the neighborhood as well. Missoula wants to eliminate a lot of, they don't want people to build way out or up, and so they're trying to confine things to the city. What happens now is that it's very, very difficult to find land in the city. It's very expensive. There's lots of different restrictions on what you can do as far as subdividing in the city. There's very few things available anymore in Missoula. So our government needs to look at making it easier for people to develop outside the city limits and make it cost effective. There's a lot of regulations. You have building regulations. In some areas, you're restricted to height. Other things, they just came out with one that you can't have a garage that's towards the front of the house. The garage has to be pushed back. It can't be more in the front. We've gone through lots of changes in the city. They've done what they've called we've been involved in a task force, the growth management task force, and they've wanted to change a lot of the building designs. So you have to be very, very careful. You have to be within code. You can't just go get a building permit and build anything you want. The building department reviews each and every one of your plans, and if there isn't something correct and to code, you have to fix that. Pretty nice designs. We had a subdivision called Bridgecourt Village that was nationally recognized in a publication called Professional Builder in the October 1998 issue. It was recognized because it's an affordable housing project, and it was also recognized because it was neo-traditional design, and it's a 2.2 acre parcel with 29 homes, alley-loaded garages, and a pocket park, and it was a very unique design for this area. And I think that Bridgecourt is an excellent example of infill. I love the project because it's very tasteful, it's done very nicely, has excellent curb appeal. The lot was not something that other builders were attracted to because there's an irrigation ditch right in the front of it, and we built a bridge over that. That's where Bridgecourt Village came from, and it's just a very, very attractive subdivision. We sold 29 homes in a 1-year period of time, which, it's a good example of infill, but it's also an excellent example of an affordable housing project, which is something that we're very proud of that we were able to achieve with that project. Look at Linda Vista area, and I look at Mountain Shadows area, and it's going up the mountain. And when I came here in 1979, that didn't exist. I mean, there was nothing on that hill, and now that hill is really, you don't see much of the hill anymore. You see a whole lot.
At the current time, we have 12 acres of land. Primarily, we use the land for grazing. We have a few horses, so we use it primarily for that purpose. We also cut hay, and then I sell the hay to other people that have horses. The primary factor that we considered when we looked to buy land to build a home was the location of the property. That was a primary emphasis. And when we looked at location, we looked at the school districts because we knew we were going to have young children. We also looked at the accessibility to Missoula, being close enough to Missoula to be able to get to work relatively quickly. And then also to be able to purchase enough land to have some seclusion so that we are not in a situation where there's lots of different people around, because we did want some privacy. Well, the commuting back and forth to town does get to be a problem. As the kids get older and they're in swimming lessons or they're in dance, we do a lot of trips back and forth into town, so the driving back and forth gets to become quite a burden when you live out. Even though we're not that far out of town, we're only about 20 minutes from town.
Before you built?
When we purchased the land, we're a mile off the main road, so we had to put in a driveway as well as make a lot of improvements to the land. As far as we put in a well, we built a pond, we had to bring in a little bit of fill dirt for the house. And those are the primary improvements that we made. We've also recently brought in natural gas. We originally had propane, so we brought in natural gas. And of course we brought in electricity when we moved in as well.
Development in general is a controversial issue, basically because things are changing, and as things change, people's expectations get run over. Someone buys a house with the expectation that the field next door is going to stay a field, and all of a sudden someone comes in, the people who own it, and decide, we're going to put up houses on this field, and so that person's playground or open space or view shed or buffer is gone, and so people have lots of concerns about change and, as a consequence, growth. And as a community, I think we wrestle with that a lot because we're growing, because we're a nice place for people to live. Inevitable. We're going to grow. More and more people are going to come here and live here because it's a nice place to live. Then the question is, okay, how do we want to grow? Do we want to just let it happen, free market, wherever someone has an idea to put a house, let them do it. If they want to put a street someplace, let them do it. We've experienced that to some degree already. If you look at some of the development in the South Hills, look at development in the area just west of Reserve Street, there's lots of that kind of development. It's happened piecemeal, it's happened small pieces at a time, and it hasn't happened coherently. What I think we need to do as a community is to first of all acknowledge that we're going to grow, and then think about, okay, what are the kind of things that we want to do? How do we want to look? What are the ways to do this the most cost effectively? One of the big differences between sprawling, which is what happens when you just kind of let it happen, versus encouraging infill or encouraging tight kind of concentric density, is the cost of providing infrastructure and the cost of providing services. Two of the main things that we do as a city government are to provide services, and then we have to have infrastructure in order to do that. Well, if you've only got 5 houses over a stretch of road that is a mile long, it costs a lot more to build that, or
you can't spread the cost of that road out over as many people as if you had 50 houses in that same stretch of road. So that's a strong argument for encouraging density, encouraging that we build to more than one dwelling unit for every half acre or one dwelling unit per acre. The same thing happens when we talk about putting sewer in. You know, the more pipe you have to lay, the more it costs, the more hole you have to dig. The same thing is true when we talk about providing services. If you have to, it costs about $600,000 to staff a fire station. If that fire station serves 10,000 people versus it could be serving 15,000 people, it's a lot easier for us to pay for it if we're serving more people. We can spread the costs out over more people. And for fire station in particular, one of the most important things is the response time. And so if you're serving an area that is, say, a 5-mile radius versus an area that's a 2-mile radius, and you have the same number of people in the 5-mile area versus the 2-mile area, it's obvious you can get to the people in the 2-mile area a lot faster than the people in the 5-mile area. And so that increases their property values, that increases their safety, it increases our ability to get there when they have a heart attack or whatever. So there are cost efficiencies there for the community. What I envision for the future is that we're going to continue to grow. We need to do it in ways that are both cost effective for us as a community in terms of providing infrastructure and services, and we need to do it we need to grow ourselves in ways that are cost effective or convenient for people to do the things that they need to do. One of the things that we have not done well is integrate commercial businesses with residential areas. We have in the past been driven by this rule that we don't mix those two things. And we've also been driven by the notion that we do everything in a car. And if we build the infrastructure that way, then that's what'll happen. Or if we build the infrastructure in a way that prohibits us from mixing uses or prohibits us from mixing modes of transportation. So if we build really big highways like Reserve Street that are over 100 feet wide, it makes it really hard for anybody but the healthiest person to get across that street on foot in the period of a light change. And so what happens then is that young people and old people in particular can't go back and forth, and that highway, which makes vehicular transportation a lot better than it was, becomes a wall for everybody who's on foot or in a wheelchair or on a bicycle. It's just like putting up a big wall. We can design around those things. We don't have to build roads that way. We can build them so that it's easy for people to get back and forth. And when we do that, that's the kind of thing that makes neighborhoods, and that gives people the opportunity to get around those other ways than having to drive a car. So we need to think about those types of things when we grow. Another element of growing has to do with what do we do in terms of parks, places for to recreate, places for people to go out and enjoy themselves. I think too often in suburban America, what we do is we think about the castle, the place the person lives, where they sleep and cook their meals, and that's all. And we don't think about all of the things around that really are the things that make up a neighborhood or a community. And that means parks, it means having sidewalks, it means having transportation corridors, it means having commercial uses that are close by. So we, as the designers of cities, we need to be thinking about those aspects of how we grow. And if we don't think about it, really I don't think we can count on the market to think about those things for us. we need to, as part of the people who are here to think about what's best for our community, it's important to try to keep our eye on those things, the amenities, and do what we can to make sure that they happen. From kind of the bureaucratic or regulatory side of things, we've updated our urban area comprehensive plan, and in that, I mean, that's essentially our broader guide for how we grow. And what we've said in there is that we want to grow, we want the population growth to happen in or next to the city, rather than happening out in the country. What happens when it happens out in the country is we slice up all the open space, plus it's less alienation if we build neighborhoods that encourage people to to be around each other and have to put up with each other. Okay. I think a real interesting thing that points out the dilemmas that communities and neighborhoods have in terms of growth has just happened recently in the Orchard Homes area. It's an area with a lot of potential infill. There's lots of 1 and 2 and 5 acre tracts that have not been built out. And I'm talking about the area that's bounded by Russell Street, 3rd Street, Reserve Street, and the river. There have been a number of projects in there to build new houses. And the neighbors were, in general, reacting pretty negatively to those projects. And there was one in particular just recently, Missy's Way, that there was a lot of resistance to on the part of the neighbors. And the city council responds to that kind of resistance. It's, you know, those people vote, so I'm going to go to bat for them. At the same time, the school district decided to shut down Emma Dickinson or Hawthorne, and ultimately it was Emma Dickinson. And what those people began to realize, that they had a dilemma of their own to deal with. They could either continue to have that field open next door, maybe. I mean, there's still market forces they're saying it's going to get developed, and face the consequence of having a school closed, the school that their kids would be able to walk to. And so now they're going to have to ride a bus or walk over a busy street in order to get to school. Or they can try to find ways to encourage reasonable development in their neighborhood where there's lots of infill potential. And maybe they'll be able to save their school because there are enough kids who live in that neighborhood again. And it was interesting to see a number of the opponents to Missy's Way, to see their position evolve and change over the course of the debate on school closure. But those are the types of things that we have to consider, and that it's rare that that all comes together in the same month or two, where both the positive and the negative hit people right in the face and make them deal with, geez, is this really the best course for us? But we've got to be able to find ways to talk among ourselves and educate ourselves so that we understand that if we don't encourage infill, if we don't encourage more density, we're going to have more school closures, and we're going to see higher taxes. And those are two things that we don't want. And we're going to see less amenities out there in what used to be open space.